Dr. Fauci is responding to the attacks on him. Here's what he had to say to MSNBC anchor Chuck Todd.
It's very dangerous, Chuck, because a lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science. And anybody that looks at what's going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that. That is what's going on. Science and the truth are being attacked.
Joining us now to discuss is Democratic strategist and council member at large for Montgomery County, Maryland, Will Jawando, and senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, Patrice Onwuka. Welcome, guys.
So I think any attack on me is an attack on journalism and the truth. So just to set the ground rules here, so nobody can...
Be careful, guys.
All right, as long as we've got that. Okay. Andrew Lloyd Webber says he doesn't care what the government says. He will reopen his London theaters by June 21st, come hell or high water.
And fake vaccination cards were being sold on Amazon. The company says they pulled the product and are investigating. Okay, guys, obviously it's tempting to dwell on that Fauci clip because it is some funny shit. That is hilarious. The way he sees himself as science embodied and then also says, if you disagree with such a grand assessment of himself, you are attacking science. I mean, it's just really incredible. Will, let me go to you first. I want to ask if you think Fauci is helping or hurting the cause at this point. I think he's probably starting to turn a lot of people off, but maybe he's only turning a lot of people off on the right or people who are really sort of like have hyper media awareness. So do you think at this point he's a net benefit, or if he's hurting the cause of getting people vaccinated and getting over this last hump?
Well, look, Dr. Fauci, disclaimer, is my constituent, lives here in Montgomery County, Maryland. But I will not use his line and say that, if you attack me, you're attacking the government itself and our democracy. Look, people are free to have their own opinions. I will say, I do think the point he was trying to get at, which is something we've dealt with as local elected officials, we act as the Board of Health. Governments across the country have had to deal with this from the federal, state, and local level, making this tough decisions about what to open, when to do it, what are the restrictions, is that you want to be led by the science. And I think in knowing that the science is evolving over time and we learn more things, we know more now today than we did. We're not wiping down our Amazon boxes, even though hopefully they don't have those fake cards inside of them. We'll get to that. But we've learned things along the way. And I think he's tried to stick true to that. And I think he's still a value add. Look, he'll go down in history as someone who has led us through. He was a steady hand when we had the last president in and when he was telling us to use bleach and things. So I think his reputation will hold. I understand the frustration. I understand why people want to open. But you have to try to be led by the science. And in Europe, they're dealing with these new variants, and they don't really know exactly what they're dealing with. And so it's you have to be safe.
And Patrice, to pick up on that, let's have somebody defend Fauci here. Like, he had a tough hand, didn't he? I mean, if your boss is Donald Trump in the middle of a pandemic, do you think that how much do you think that influenced how he handled his relationship with the public?
Well, if he took his role seriously as someone who's supposed to be setting the tone for what health officials nationwide should do, then it shouldn't matter who his boss is. With Fauci, I think we see something elevated, which I don't think the public really knew about as much before, which is the difference between leading by science or following the science versus the public policy decisions that have to be made, and whether there's full disclosure to the public about why the difference between what science says and why policymakers like my co-panelist here the decisions that they make. And I think a lot of people have looked back and said, well, these scientists, they seem to, they tell us one thing, but perhaps maybe, as Dr. Fauci's emails expose, maybe some of what they're saying or what they're trying to cover up is that they have conflicts of interest, or that they are considering protecting the funding sources for their own research. And that may inform some of the policy decisions, the messaging that gets sent to the public about mask wearing, about the efficacy of different vaccines or different therapeutics. And I think that is what is concerning. I do believe Dr. Fauci's trust has been undermined in him in the eyes of many, even those who, thought, hey, I don't follow Fauci. Now I think because, of the emails that have been leaked, we're seeing that his conversations early on in the early days of this pandemic show us a different side of him. And it's sad, but it's also, I think, a wake-up call to the scientific community that it's not just about protecting their dollars to their institutions and their research, but it is actually about the science and about public health.
Well, Patrice, let me go back to you. Andrew Lloyd Webber, the story about him saying he doesn't care, he's going to reopen his London theaters by June 21st, come hell or high water, no matter what the government says. And then we also think about these fake vaccination cards being sold on Amazon. There's an interesting connection between those two stories, right? Because I think we originally expected that some of those vaccination cards would be required to get into places like theaters. And at least in my experience, that hasn't happened yet. Do you think this sort of bold statement by Andrew Lloyd Webber is actually going to age into anything that's bold? Or do you think those statements have sort of actually been the things that have prevented governments or have prevented businesses from requiring those vaccination cards? Like, what is the chicken or egg thing here? Is it the fact that the vaccination cards were so easily falsified, the point where they could be sold on Amazon, that, led people not to require these and to things opening back up more easily? What came first?
I'd like to believe it's freedom and liberty, at least in this country and maybe in England. I'd like to believe that, people, the government recognized, there would be a huge backlash if you start requiring people to have a card like they do in some countries like South Africa that designated your race, for example. I think that's a step backwards, and hopefully government recognized that that's not the way we need to go. And obviously we're seeing the knockoffs on Amazon and probably on eBay as well. But I think what Mr. Weber's case signals to us is that one person's nicety is another person's necessity, and it's their livelihood. And I think we saw plenty of small business owners who are pushing back, saying we need to save our lives and our livelihoods. Do not keep us closed, and do not impose these draconian measures to do so.
And Will, on Fauci and his credibility, I want to get your take on this, because we already know that last spring he lied to the public about the role of masks. And he has said that he told the lie because he was worried that, and the entire kind of public health infrastructure was worried that if he talked about the value of masks, that there would be a run on masks and frontline responders wouldn't be able to get access to PPE. And so in order to save lives, he misled the public. Let's say that was an okay decision at the time. At what point should a public health official resign over that to restore the credibility of public health officials generally?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What I'll say is, I saw and lived the run on masks. You couldn't find them. You had people that had access, even with that misleading, a run on the PPE and on the N95s, and we all saw the pictures of the healthcare workers wearing plastic bags and reusing their masks 4 or 5 times. My mother-in-law is a healthcare worker in New York who contracted COVID, had to reuse her N95 multiple times before in the early days. So it was real, and that doesn't make the decision necessarily the right one, but I understand why it was done. And the question of whether to resign or not, I think there's going to be a lot of things in this pandemic. This is something, unless you're 102, no one's dealt with, and we haven't had the science back then to deal with the Spanish flu and the way we're dealing with it now. It's an unprecedented situation where we've had to make tough decisions. And I think there'll be a lot of looking back and saying, how can we do it better? Personally, I don't think that he needs to resign. I think he, was trying to do what he thought was right at the time. But we should go back and learn from our mistakes and be prepared for the future.
We'll be back with more Team Rising after this.